Well then, we'll start. This session's a bit of a catch-all, I guess. It's a kind of a grab bag in terms of feedback that I've heard from customers and or seen on discussion threads and forums and just some of the usability issues. You know, last cycle we had the override files, which was a great thing. But maybe we need more flexibility and better tools for administrators. The first one that just comes up is just a command. I mean, I hate to put it this way, but essentially check config for Ubuntu or for Upstart in this case. You need line commands to be able to enable and disable services, and at least as close as possible, be able to run a command and that tells you what starts on boot.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand the requirement for this system administration moving from System 5. It's a very valuable tool. It's just not that easy to implement for Upstart because of the way that it handles stopping jobs. But I've got some ideas, and I think we can make some inroads to providing such a tool. I mean, there's basically two requirements there. Be able to.
The first part's easier, right? The enable disable.
Yes and no. We can currently disable jobs, you know, with the manual standards there, but that wouldn't actually work. It wouldn't actually allow to write check config, because what actually manual standards actually does is to actually clear the start on condition. Now, so we can change what the manual standard actually does, so that it still retains that information for a tool like check config, or check config like tool. We can also provide a command line tool, maybe occurs as suggested in the blueprint, which would obviously, you know, displaying whether a job configuration is enabled or disabled should be doable. The problem is whether you can determine if a job will run or not if the configuration is enabled. Because normally you won't know. Upstart normally doesn't know. You know, it's one event and everything else follows from that. But yeah, I mean, you know, looking at the problem, I haven't spent enough time on it. We can say definitively that certain services will start. If you say start on run level, chances are it's going to start. Start on run level X or A or B or C, again, it's going to start, assuming X is your run level. It's the AND conditions where it becomes a bit more tricky to say definitively. But what you could do, potentially, and it's just an idea, we could consider caching, writing a log of what did start last time for that particular run level, such that we could say in this tool, it's a bit of a crude way of doing it maybe, but you know, we can say this job might start. We don't know because we haven't actually booted the machine yet or rebooted the machine, but it did start last time for this run level. Of course, that doesn't take account of the fact you may have changed some other job's configuration, so it couldn't be 100% reliable. So what we're trying to do basically is you know, kind of bash a square peg through a round hole. Upstart, as you all know, probably flips the startup process on its head for very good reasons. It's a very efficient system, but it does make producing a tool like check config quite tricky.
Although even knowing whether something's enabled or disabled has some value,
well,
even if it's not guaranteed to start on boot. You know.
But yeah, I mean, we can kind of do that now,
without having to. Well, you actually have to open the file and inspect it to know, you know, the override file to know whether something is. Because you could have an override file, but it might not be a manual stanza in there.
Well,
could be just alternate start condition.
Yeah. I mean, show config might give you something, but essentially, I think we can do more in terms of providing a tool like check config.
So, James, we can draw that picture with your excellent visualization tool that, which tells me that it is possible to determine all the events that lead up to whether or not something starts, right?
Well, yes, the tools. It's a first pass. It shows you some hopefully valuable information, but it's essentially what it does. I mean, as you've probably seen it, if you have a job that starts on event A or B or C, it will draw links from your job to A, B, and C.
Yeah.
But what it doesn't show you is that logical condition. So you can't say definitively if it will Upstart, because you know, A, B, and C and stuff.
Yeah.
But there are certain things we can do. I personally need to do a bit more research on what's possible, but I think we can come up with a new tool or a new command in the CTL to provide a check config-like system. It might not be exactly the same, but it could certainly show you if a job is enabled or disabled, and it should be able to tell you for most jobs, I think. And most of the jobs.
I not just see it, but well, I mean, and do the enabling and disabling.
Yes.
I don't like the idea of having to create a file and remove it. It just doesn't. There's something
Right.
inelegant, or at least just foreign to me as a non-developer, or as more of a sysadmin kind of guy.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously anybody's at liberty to write a shell script which does that for you. You know, just creates the override file. But yes, I mean, it's a simple facility. That's the whole point of Upstart. It's a very simple, elegant system, and it does what it needs to do, and not much more right now. You know, other developers are taking different approaches with different systems. But yeah, I mean, I recognise that it would probably help people migrating to Upstart if they had a more familiar tool. So I'm certainly open to looking at the options for for a command to disable jobs. There's a number of tacks we could take, and I've got some thoughts. We can discuss it today. I don't know if you want to focus on this entirely, this talk.
Well, there's maybe one of the, aside from some of the notes that you put into the blueprint at the end, which I'd also like to talk about, but the thing that I haven't talked about at the top of the blueprint, which I think is significant, is status stanza, and or custom actions, which Scott talked about in the past, but I don't know if it ever got implemented. Which would be fine, because then you could have a custom action called status and take care of it. But some sort of service introspection is what people are used to, and also what a lot of tools are expecting, like management tools that are, like Tivoli or something like that. They're gonna run the init status command to see the true status of a service, and not just determine whether the PID is there.
And it's not random that it expects that to be there. For LSB, I mean, there's an interface that is reasonable to expect exists.
Yeah, I looked through some of them. I mean, some of them absolutely just check that the PID is live too, but you can, but it's customizable, so.
Is status optional in LSP? It seems like I think it might be,
But I mean,
recommended maybe even.
It's clearly not in all.
It's not in all
scripts.
scripts,
No.
but yeah.
No, but we didn't even really support it hardly at all.
Right. So the alternative that's been presented in the past, so we know where we are and have been, is that rather than having a status stanza, a post start that makes sure that the service is running, it is enough to make the status command of Upstart reliable. Because if your post start verifies that the service starts and is reachable, then at that point it's running. There's a suggestion that that's enough, that that's as far as we should go. Now, the counterpoint to that is that some services then later on become unhealthy. Yeah. And the status command should do a little bit more of a health check. It should actually connect and ask, or like do a MySQL and ping type of thing.
Isn't that what might be possible?
If I'm doing status, I want to know what the status is now. I don't care about what it was.
Right, there's a difference between process running and service running. And yeah, like if you're using, like one of the things that we often use the woefully inadequate init scripts back in the day for in doing like heartbeat on top of MySQL and stuff like that, is that you don't want heartbeat to only fail over if the process dies, because actually it's already running in an Angel process, so it's just going to restart itself. You want it to fail over when it stops responding on its network port. Like that's way more interesting than process life.
Right.
Process life is completely uninteresting. So yeah, it's a different.
So and then the counter to that, being in the init system, is that you could certainly just put that in another place that's standard, that it doesn't necessarily need to be Upstart's concern.
Yeah,
But
also
things put it somewhere.
Absolutely, that's actually
And somebody said
I think
Nagios,
what's most
but
important.
Well,
Nagios
it's-
wouldn't be the place, because that's not the standard. That's not.
Right.
Well, it's also,
It's very
but
common.
there's also, if you're talking about service dependencies and things starting when other things start, if you've gotten something, say MySQL starts up, and I'm just going to keep using that because that's where I come from. but it starts up, it takes, say, maybe 30 seconds for it to actually start listening in a network port because it's got to do log replay. Then you don't want things that depend on it, services that depend on it starting until log replay is done.
Which is why the current Upstart job has a post start that does MySQL admin ping in a loop until it actually responds, and MySQL properly doesn't actually respond to that ping positively until it's ready to serve traffic.
Yeah.
That is the appropriate way. The question is, there's a nice chunk of script directly in the post start stanza. Should that be in a more uniform place that then I can go and run the same thing?
Right, because the other thing that comes in as a developer is, if I have something that needs an Upstart script, historically the process was go ask Kebab, he'll do it. Now I ask Clint because I know he can do that. But you know, a lot of this stuff is really kind of not well understood in the development community, let alone the administration community.
Yeah.
And so if you could make that stuff more standard, so you said that there.
Well, and also,
I know where I can do
Less
that.
code is good.
you know, the other thing too, and this may be going too far into implementation, but Heartbeat and now, which is now Pacemaker, I guess, because they had to make it more complicated. Used the OCF files to describe how you would do health checks on services, and so just brainstorming, maybe like since that's sort of a standard thing and services already provide a description of how as I'm going to put this, you know, OCF file in a standard location, which describe how you're going to service health check me. If one of those exists, then maybe that's a sort of can be a more standardized way to perform those types of checks, so that those two things, so that you don't have like two systems that are designed in parallel to do large similar things that you have to re-implement the same code twice.
So the
Maybe
question I would have, only the hesitance I would have is, what is the size of the tool that understands OCF files? Like, are they super simple and we can write a very simple bash script that can interpret it, or do we need Pacemaker?
I don't think you need Pacemaker. It's been a little while, but
Because there's another suggestion, and at some point Dustin Kirkland added something for, I think it might have been just for a single implementation. It didn't actually go into Ubuntu, where the service command would look in a certain directory, and if there was a script aimed the same as the service, it would run that if you said service blah status to get around this problem. And I actually thought it was a really elegant solution, but there is a compelling reason, I think, to put it all in the Upstart job, which is this is all the stuff that means how to manage that service, rather than just how to start that service. It's how to manage that service. So there's, I think it's more of a, we have to make an opinionated decision here. Do we want to keep Upstart jobs how to start services, or do we want to make them more centered around how to manage them? I lean towards the former, actually, and just let this status thing live in another command.
Just make sure we assign somebody to do that part of the work.
Absolutely. Well, I think Dustin's got a dev. He may have even done a merge proposal against the tools that provide service to do this.
Right, and because from my perspective, I care much less how it's implemented than that it's there.
Agreed. Yeah, tell me exactly how you expect me to run the system. And right now we don't have a story, so that's, I think we just need a story.
Going back to this whole status standard or action standards, what sort of information are we after here? Because in Upstart, currently, you know, after the process is running or has done a number of forks, as far as it's concerned, its job is done, unless the process dies and it's restarted.
Is the service usable, is what we're asking for.
Right. So what kind of scenarios I'm asking, you know, what sort of status information would we want to display? I mean, we've had much about that, but I mean that.
No, the return would just be
okay,
running, yeah.
And a 0 or 1 return status.
So we're talking about the service is okay, the process is independent.
I would say
a good version of the script, yes, it would check some form of method of the service in some way, shape or form, and be able to understand, like the MySQL one, that the service is in no good state somehow. Failing that, yeah, the fallback for some form of service that doesn't have that ability would be just check the PID and say yes, it's running.
Yep.
That's what we currently do. But from what I can remember, when I used to run systems was 5-init. The status command varied, the output varied significantly. I mean,
Yep.
it's intended for humans to read,
It's,
as opposed to scripts to parse. And
it's
that can be
actually
problematic.
it's actually been defined by the LSB now in
Okay.
terms of return codes that are supposed to be returned given various states from the status command from init scripts. So
Right.
if you're conforming at all, it should be very very specific.
Yeah, it actually is a very well
And not very-
defined
I
spec.
would argue that before we switched to Upstart, we had a satisfactory design, and we'd like to at least have that. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be better, but I mean,
Right.
not regressing would be a good thing.
Sorry, not regressing.
Well,
Well, we changed the design, essentially,
Right.
is, I mean, that's a conclusion we came to 6 months ago, is that we've designed the system not to have that anymore. And now we're suggesting that we should put that back into the design in a different form. Possibly still with LSB in mind.
right. Under the hood, make it however you have to, but at the top level, the interface should be consistent.
Yes. Well, and that's where, we're not doing LSB, but we should, or I think it's a good idea to conform to LSB where it makes sense.
Right.
We are not going to be at etc init service name. We are reachable that way, but only through the magic of the Upstart job script.
Right.
So, let's, make sure that the return codes, let's use the LSB return codes and the word status. Beyond that, yeah, I agree. How we do that, it's more about, let's also define how users would access this. My suggestion would be through the service command, which has become the best practice. Yes, Mark.
So just to answer your earlier question, the OCF resource agents, as they're called, are shell scripts that you run and you pass them commands such as monitor, and that returns specific codes, whether the service is running or not running or whatever. And a lot of things already install these in userlib OCF resource.d, blah, blah, blah. So that's a thing that may be available already out of the box to fill in. So it may just be an interface shown there.
And many of these status commands are also already available in the source init script that we're converting away from, or that we at one time did convert away from. So, second question, do we want to do we want to maintain a delta then? This is yet another delta. The Upstart job is already a delta from Debian until we get the work done to get the Upstart jobs in. But we're trying to do that. So if we also then now invent a new status thing for command for the service, we also now introduce new opportunities for delta with Debian.
Right, but then so whether this is implemented as an integral part of the Upstart code base, I think it should be something that is considered part of the Upstart project, and so that hopefully the Upstart maintaining Debian would bring that along too, so that stuff could also go out there too.
Okay, so that seems like an action item to make sure that would work.
Yeah.
I think you need to remember that this still needs discussion with Keybuck, who's obviously not around because of the time zone differences and such. But I mean, personally, I've been in favour of a flexible facility like the custom actions, but we don't have much of a design on that.
Well, and the custom action could run the service command.
It
So-
could,
so-
but then we're trying to, well, we're considering at least segregating Upstart jobs from Sys5 jobs, and we've had problems in the past with strange time interaction races in that area. So we need to be aware of the fact that maybe we don't want to be too reliant on a legacy command. I don't know.
Right. What I think would be unfortunate is if every post start then ended up just being service Upstart job status. That's sort of like counterintuitive. Maybe we should have just built in the status functionality to Upstart.
Yeah, maybe there's a reason.
But again,
not to
I think
do that.
there's an opinionated decision to make. Are Upstart jobs for managing services or starting services?
Well-
At this point, they've been focused almost entirely on starting them with an eye toward managing them. But there's less mechanics in Upstart jobs for management than there are for starting.
Right. And that, I think, is a heritage of the initial desktop focus in design, because in the desktop, that's really all that's interesting. Server, very different. And
Well, it's something Scott felt quite strongly about as well, I think. He felt that it was the responsibility of a different tool.
I'm sorry?
I think Scott explicitly felt that it was the responsibility of a different tool.
Right.
And it's not so much, well, I don't think it's simply heritage.
Could be,
I think
okay.
It's
That's
partly
fair.
partly an opinion as well.
Right, and Upstart or a different tool, I don't care. It's just we didn't do the different tool either. Sure.
I don't know how you make the clean distinction though, because starting and stopping services is part of managing them. Like,
I agree.
that's not it.
Yeah, it's unclear, but I'm comfortable with a decision where we build this into the service command and tell everybody that's how you do health checks. Because right now, that's how you're supposed to do them for LSB and init scripts. So if we also make that work really well for Upstart jobs that have defined a status capability, we don't have to do it in Upstart. We could even do it in Bash scripts now and convert it to Upstart when Upstart makes that decision. I mean, I think I would respect Scott's decision that, you know, Upstart isn't involved with booting the system. Another tool can handle the status query. And I think, you know, there was a suggestion like a Monet or another process manager type of thing. Let that do that. I think we should go forward with that because honestly, we're all busy. And this is there's already I know that there's a dev diff out there already for the service command to make this work. So there's no work required in Upstart to make this work. It's only a philosophical decision whether we think that's wrong.
I think one of the main requirements on the service side, especially since Austin has replaced init, would be that there should be a very clear way to be able to disable a service from starting. That didn't happen in Lucid. For me, that was the biggest grind on the last MTS, that we implemented Upstart before we could be able to disable services, so anything to install there automatically would install.
There's ways to disable them, just not pretty.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not clear. It's not.
Well, it is. It's documented. It's very simple. It's very unified. That's what it's about. I appreciate that, you know, people might prefer an actual command type, like checkbox or something like that. But
it's a lot more scriptable if you're dealing with service individually. Yes, it makes sense. But if you're dealing with 80 servers, you want something that you can send a command to all servers in order to do that.
Right. But I mean, even today, it's currently relatively trivial to write a 20-line JavaScript to basically write echo manual to an override file, append it to the override file, and that's guaranteed, therefore, to stop the search from starting on the next week.
Unless it's started by a weak job.
Sorry? Unless it's started by another job.
Yeah.
I think we need to look at those jobs that are calling start explicitly and try to understand exactly why they're having to do that.
Because of the state problem and no ability to do and. That's reality. I've done it 3 or 4 times now, and it's only in response to I have to control exactly when this starts, and it can't be before or after anything, or it has to be after certain things and before certain things.
When, I've brought up Pacemaker before, but like when you're doing clustered setups and things like Pacemaker is the thing that wants to start and stop your jobs if you're managing those jobs as part of a high availability setup across multiple machines. So you definitely do not want them, you don't want Upstart starting them. But it would be nice to be able to tell it to start them when Pacemaker has decided that MySQL wants to run on this machine.
Yes.
That you would like to have that happen in a sensible way.
Yes.
Rather than re-implementing that
Rather than running user spin dash.
That's a-
Andreas, I think Andreas wrote a pacemaker Upstart right.
Which is not recommended, and they don't recommend, Pacemaker doesn't recommend using the one that just calls the init script either. What they recommend is writing an OCF resource station,
Yeah.
which may then call.
Because the
init
OCF
script.
resource station respond to more things and understand that they are being called in the context of a cluster management, of a pacemaker. So.
Ponty, in a previous session you mentioned that I think yourself, Kim, were talking about MySQL and the fact that it would automatically be started when you install the package. And we could conceive of having the packaging disable all services by default, all services that need configuration and tuning by default by providing a .override file. And that way, you kind of, it's a bit like a hand grenade. We provide it with a pin.
Yeah.
If you want to, if you the admin want to start it, you remove the pin, you remove the override file, off you go.
That would make specifically the MySQL folks really happy because all of them, especially from the Red Hat background, are used to needing to explicitly enable the start of a service that and they always bitched at me because I was doing the Debian thing and starting it on package install, and that caused people to like scream at me, and I was like, but no, this is the way that we do things. So at this point, however, I don't know how many people that would screw because it would be a change in behavior. But
My general feeling on that is it's a known policy that services are started when they're installed, and there's known ways to disable them before you install a package. So you can admins who don't like the behavior should put the override file in. I know it sounds funny, before you install it. It's a known behavior. It seems a little wonky, like, oh, I installed it and it's already running.
It's a bit content later, basically.
But there was never any way to do that before.
Right, but it's, for people who aren't used to administering Debian or derived systems, it's counterintuitive. For people who are, it's how you, it's what you expect.
Exactly.
And we can't violate that expectation.
I mean, in many of the
It's a
cases,
tricky place to work, yeah.
putting an etc default, whatever file is the way to do that with Upstart jobs. Some of them still respect those, and others would work to put an override file.
Yeah, I mean, I personally like to understand more of these use cases where you don't want a service started, because 9 times out of 10, if I understand it, you would. Why are you installing it if you don't want to start it?
The case of some of them is that they want to install it and then use the tools that come along with it to configure it further.
For you,
I can't
use it.
materialize one right now for you.
Troubleshooting.
Well, I mean, there are.
I'm having a problem on boot, and I want to know what is causing it.
There's not a sane default. You are supposed to install and not start.
Exactly.
But in almost all cases, there really is something that's a reasonable place to start.
Sure.
And the one I've seen the most is like when you install spam assassin, spam needs disabled. It doesn't really make sense that there is a state default for that. It's really a bug.
Yeah. But one that's open to interpretation. So that's, I mean,
right.
that policy is not really up for discussion here in this session. What is how do we make sure that we support users who want to disable that service before it starts, before it even exists?
Yeah, because policy is all well and good, but administering 80 machines sometimes means something else.
Right.
Yes.
You have
And
to
being
do
able to express that in a sensible
Well, and actually,
way.
policy I think helps you there because you know what to expect.
Totally, yeah. But I'm just saying, as long as you've got the tooling to accomplish the task you want to accomplish, then all is great.
So the tool, to me, the override file is pretty good in that making sure there's a manual override file. I know that some people have raised concerns that that's not quite enough to programmatically disable
I agree.
for various reasons. And it's also not truly disabling the service from starting. It's saying don't automatically start this.
Right, whereas if I say I don't want it to start, I mean I don't want it to start.
Yes. So one suggestion that I came up with was add another stanza which is disabled, which means something different than manual.
Mm-hmm.
Manual means don't, erase the start on condition. Disabled basically means erase all the conditions. It's an empty job at that point.
Yeah.
It exists. You can see it in the list, but when you say start it, you just get return 0 and or maybe just return 1. This is disabled. Put a message.
Yeah.
It's disabled.
I like that idea in principle, but there are real world issues around adding that standard. It's the same with the manual right now, because what we're saying is we want a command like check config, which is basically going to rewrite our configuration files. It's going to add well, it could just append to an override file. That file already exists. What do? You know, we've got to be careful about modifying these files. We shouldn't have to be modifying potentially quite a large config file, rewriting the whole file just to enable a disabled job. That's my personal view right now.
You don't want to open up an override file and see 16 disabled.
Exactly.
Because you ran check config disable it 16 times.
Yeah.
That's harder to do then.
Yeah, so a possibility is to use enable init.conf. If you look at the man page, it references init.conf. It shouldn't do, really, because, well, that's not true. Init.conf is allowed to exist. It isn't allowed to have any content right now. But that still has the same intrinsic problem in that if you use init.conf to record, you know, disable space MySQL space whatever, got the whole locking issue and stuff. I think we need a bit more discussion around this potentially, but yeah, if it's actually possible, we can do this. It makes sense to be able to fully disable a job, I agree. We have got a bit more complexity, of course, when you consider instances. You know, which instance of the job you want to be disabled? All of them? One of them? Any of them? Reg expression? So it's not quite as simple as a task as maybe it appears.
Of course it's not.
But yeah, we you know, I'm happy to take the action to the best way of allowing us to disable a job fully.
Okay.
So there were a few other things that you had put on the blueprint. Oh, no, not IRC, but I don't know if you want to talk about, James. Job logging, discoverable boot path.
Yeah. So well, actually,
an interactive boot being one thing I've heard from people and customers.
Right. I mean, my background is more sort of in the old days, traditional Unix and then RHEL, and they've had interactive boot for years. I personally find it very useful. I don't know what the audience here finds. I mean, is there a requirement to be able to effectively sort of single-step a boot process?
I love the idea, and it goes with one of the criticisms that some have had of the Upstart or the Ubuntu boot experience, which is that it's really hard to know where it breaks when it breaks. Mm-hmm. And being able to single step through, you know, it's like any good debugger, you know, yeah. Single step till it breaks and then run it again and don't step through that.
It could easily hide the condition you're trying to find.
Yeah, that's the primary problem.
But I don't think that's a reason not to do it at all.
Well, and that's good information in a debugging process. And that means you know you have a race condition.
Right, and in fact, there have been times when if I could manually step through it and get it working, that would be enough for right now.
Yeah, that would get the CEO off my butt. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, I just realised, going back to what my previous comment about understanding why jobs are calling stop and start explicitly themselves, I have done a little bit of work on this interactive boot already, and all it is a job configuration bar, which happens to be making use of start and stop. So there is a use case. There's a bit of complexity in the sense that obviously we're handling Upstart jobs and System 5 jobs in parallel, so we obviously need to serialise that, and that in its own right might introduce problems. But just for people in the room and IRC and elsewhere, we do intend to provide or to perform some sort of audit on core, there's another session, core Upstart jobs, and we're looking to migrate existing Sys5 services to Upstart.
And the shutdown.
And the shutdown, exactly. The shutdown currently, the shutdown currently makes use, it has to be called from Sys5. Sys5 currently shuts down the system.
Yep. And
that doesn't seem to be necessary anymore. Maybe it was way back, but you know, Upstart's a mature product now. Maybe Upstart should be handling that. Yeah, I personally think there's value in interactive boot, but yes, you know, you would need to look quite carefully maybe at your visualization graph to see what, you know, if you turn up, if you stop UDEB or dbus starting, your system's not going to behave in a normal manner. But I still think it has value. And yes, we need to strive for oneiric to have a full log of every event emitted. from the first one, start up, and have that written somewhere to this help, to aid in debugging, and
Currently, we don't get all of them
we don't get all of them.
because we have to wait for Plymouth to start, right?
Well, I think it's more to do with the syslog and
So when I was doing the Plymouth Upstart bridge, I had to decide whether to put it into Upstart or into Plymouth, because obviously it could have gone into either in some ways. I ended up plumping for putting in Plymouth for various reasons. But one of the consequences of that didn't really become clear to me until later was that meant that we couldn't use Upstart's internal, the private channel or the private interface that NCTL uses, and instead we need to use the public dbus interface. Now that's fine. The public dbus interface offered what we needed after a couple of extensions, which emerged upstream. That's got but what I didn't realize, or what I didn't really think about, was that this means that you have to wait for dbus daemon to start, which only happens quite some distance into the boot. So the effect of that is that you can't hear about anything that starts before dbus daemon. I think rather than re-architecting that, it would probably be good to help push the multicast Unix socket work that Collaborate have been doing, which would allow us to talk to Upstart over dbus without having to have dbus daemon there to intercede.
Interesting.
And I would prefer that ultimately as a model. I don't know how early that's. I don't know what the state of that code is or when it's intended.
So you're talking to a remote dbus?
No, just the local dbus daemon.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, what do you mean? Right
Well,
now, or?
I'm trying to understand how that gets around the problem of being able to hear things before dbus runs.
Multicast. The point of multicast Unix sockets is that you no longer need dbus daemon to talk dbus.
Oh, very nice. Okay.
You open the multicast socket, and the kernel deals with redirecting that to whoever's interested.
So it's sort of like the AFD-bus idea.
It's an evolution of the AFD-bus idea. The guy who was working on AFD-bus rethought things and realised that multicast Unix sockets, multicast AF Unix sockets were a more elegant way to solve that.
And so we don't know the state of that though.
I don't know the state of that. The last I heard was a blog post from November or something with a lot of details.
So we can reasonably expect it in the kernel sometime in the next year.
I don't know whether we can reasonably expect it or not. Something needs to go check.
Well, I'll take that.
Sounds like an action.
There is, if that's not available on the timescale we're looking at, I had a thought we could potentially just have Upstart internally keep track of just a list of each event and emits it on the timestamp. Not do anything with it, because of course we're going to write the information, for example, when we move Upstart to run best, but
you could have an input command to dump
exactly, just dump config and then a dump config -c like dmessage to clear that buffer, and then Upstart will just remove all knowledge of those events.
Right.
That event list, that event log, and no longer log events. That would allow us to flush that data to this when the list becomes available to write. And we could potentially have some sort of interface such that it could display the last entry in that buffer or something.
Just a quick question. So we talked about the manual step through. Did we get an action from that?
Do we know? Probably not. Well, so I'm already actually working on that anyway. It does require additional work items. The sort of well, we need to change. We need to potentially change the point at which System 5 scripts are run. Currently, they run. Upstart starts. It emits its startup event, and then it fires off the RC system very early. Yeah. Earlier, arguably, than maybe it needs to be. And I think that may actually have caused some problems for services in the past. We need to look at that and we need to say, understand how we can serialise that whole kind of thought process where you've got Upstart jobs firing off in parallel with this 5.
Is there another synchronization point that's suitable for when we would start RC?
So when we start RC?
Yeah.
Well, I was just saying, let's look at the conditions.
Current one is file system and net device up LO.
Right. Which I'm not thinking of any other events that we have that are definitely after that point. That,
There's
would reliably happen.
stopped networking, and the only thing that provides is that then all statically configured network interfaces are up, which would help server users quite a bit.
Networking?
Networks now?
The networking Upstart job is a Band-Aid that you should not rely on for anything because it's racy with UDEV. It is the, in case we missed an event somewhere, let's do a last-ditch attempt to bring up network again and see if that gets us anywhere closer to perfection. But you cannot rely on even statically configured network devices actually being up at the end of that.
Oh.
Because it has no way of waiting until, if the kernel has not exposed the network driver at that point, it cannot wait for it. It has no mechanism to do that.
Right, so that's something that's been plaguing not only jobs that are converted to Upstart, but those that are just still in sys5, because there are some services that we just can't know if they're going to work or not with LO, and then pick up another network. A lot of people want to listen on a specific network, and the answer right now is go change RC sysint to something else. Like even then, if they've got 5 network interfaces, they can't guess which one will be up last.
Right.
So they end up having to convert it to an Upstart job and then pick the one that they want. It's very, very difficult. There seems to be a point that we can say, and maybe this is only a server concern, where all the statically configured network interfaces have been seen by the kernel and are up. So it sounds like IF up-A, not that point. We need more.
Right. It's not impossible to write something like that. I'm just telling you that the networking job that exists today is not that thing.
That makes sense. So the interface job then is what's supposed to be handling those dbus or UDEV events.
Yes.
So we could, after configuring, go, are there any others statically needing configuration? No. Emit, statically configured network interfaces are up.
So, I'm sorry, after what?
So we get these UDEV events and we start bringing up network interfaces. And every time we do that, we look and see that if all the static ones are done.
Network interface job, each time you do that, you go and check if you're still waiting for anything else, and then
yes, because Mountel uses this pattern as well.
Yes,
it's like, oh, I've got all the NFS interfaces, remote file systems.
That should be pretty robust. You would use basically the if query interface, if up down, which exists and was written specifically to interface if up down with Upstart. So.
Cool. I'll take that one.
Well, what did you mean by job logging facilities before I suggest anything?
Right, so that's not logging the fact that we've run a job so much as logging the output of the job, potentially. I don't know, again, if that's a useful.
Well, I've gotten that question directly where, like how can I log an individual job? And as far as I know, the answer is to redirect.
There's an open bug.
The first line in your script, you redirect.
Yes.
But it would be nice if you could say do that system-wide or, again, command-wide.
The current answer is pipe whatever you're execing to logger, and that's not a great one. There is an open bug that was on the list for Natty that just, I think, got dropped in all the changes that were going on, that supposedly is not something that a core Upstart developer would have to do. Mm-hmm. It's fairly straightforward. We need a ring buffer that has the output of all jobs, or optionally all of the jobs that have said log me. Mm-hmm. And then you could run a command that's similar to dmessage, like Upstart message, that would then dump that.
Would that be the basis for then making the two more votes on the screen?
You would see the output of specifically the things you've executed.
Right.
which is very, very useful for many services and is currently going to dev null for most of them.
Yeah, in this case, the sort of food experience.
Yeah, this is kind of more, and I was going to bring that up then.
Right, but it would help here as well, in this context.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry for the out of touch question. Current default behavior as far as console output, is that now set by default in Upstart? We attempted that and had to roll it back earlier.
Having all jobs go to console output.
Yes.
Interesting. As far as I know, that's still off.
Okay, it was attempted, and then we had some issues.
Well, I recall there was the race with the kernel opening the console, but it's not that one, right?
That was among the issues we had.
Because that would sort of solve the problem too, wouldn't it?
It would solve a piece of the problem, but the console output, actually, that does take the standard out of the job. That's where you point.
Yeah. And standard. So the idea and the suggested implementation in Upstart's bug tracker right now is that now we want to have our own ring buffer for the output of jobs separate from the console. That would then be not only dumpable by like a dmessage type command, but also have more of like a k-message type of interface where you could then dump them right into the syslog once you're ready to do that.
But I mean, there are facilities already that on the system that would like to have that sort of functionality.
Yeah.
Does it need to be an Upstart? I mean, we could use. You can write. You can.
Well, the idea is to alleviate you from having to do like pipe to something in your Upstart job. I guess
right,
to Steve's point though, console output would be better. I mean, it might get ugly, everything dumping the console, but.
Well, so if you dump to console and you're running Plymouth as a front end, Plymouth picks up that console and can do what it wants to with it as well.
Yeah.
So what are the?
So maybe we
what
should
doesn't
try.
work if we do it that way?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're missing the historical knowledge. We probably need to ask Scott why console output is not on by default.
Oh, it caused things to fail reliably at boot time. That's why.
Console owner caused things to fail reliably.
Console owner was very bad. Console output as well, we had to turn on. We had problems.
I thought Scott turned that off just because for
RC related things. RC, there's a bug trail somewhere I can go back and dig into. Or we could just upload it to an Eric with it turned on and see what breaks this time. And well, gives us time to maybe the bug, maybe the underlying bug is actually been resolved.
we need to go back and analyze it. Console owner is definitely very bad.
Yes.
These,
We don't like that one. RC does have console output turned on right now,
Okay.
but many other jobs do not.
So who would look at that? Who should look at that?
Throw me an action to dig through my mail and find out why it was turned on.
We can do that.
So does anybody else have any sort of requirements and features or?
Sorry, I missed the first half of the session. You talked about serialization already.
What did you
So
talk about?
basically having the capability of single stepping
Yes.
and you know, serializing all.
Yeah, basically, the interactive boot, but potentially that would cause your boot to behave very differently to a non-interactive boot, potentially.
Interestingly enough, if you separate the two issues of interactive and serialization,
Yes.
you can create a job that just makes the boot serialized, just by doing start
Non
and start.
and non-interactively. I mean that. Would,
Yeah, just
that
making
would-
everything run all in one line. I don't know what that really solves.
Well, one of
Well,
the
it's,
things.
I mean, it's what we talked about earlier. It changes the way that your system starts up, and it gives you some data point when you're trying to debug why the process explodes.
I could see certain frustrated users out there actually thinking it's a really awesome thing and just turning it on all the time.
Well,
farm service.
and then
Specifically
trying
outside.
to do that, and it masks a potential underlying problem, but at least it gets them out of shit immediately.
So, in terms of implementation, I just had a few ideas kicking around in my head as far as, so one of the issues is you have like 5 or 20 different jobs in the system that all have the same start trigger. And some of the things you care about, you know that these can be started in parallel in terms of the declared dependencies, but it would be nicer for instance, if you're trying to have output on the console that's readable, then you might want to serialize and do them one at a time. And an implementation of that might be that when in a certain mode, Upstart simply, when it has a set of jobs that all have the same start condition and are all set to start, it tries to start one, waits until it's into state started, and then goes to the next one, and does them in some deterministic order in terms of like alphabetical or whatever, so that you know that's only partial ordering of the system. But there are also things, you know, we can't apply that particular rule to everything where we say don't try to start another job while one's currently starting, because we have places where we need to start on starting. Is that
That would be cool if it was able to be done without a job file that was, I mean, it's a hack to do it in a job file, but it's doable. But then there are other reasons why that becomes a problem. And it might, I don't know, my head keeps going to, is that recursive? Like, are we gonna accidentally, because right now it's like start on starting anything except me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, oops. We just gone to plan.
you can write that?
Yes, you can. All right, yes. Well, I guess getting back to the point that popped into my head was that it is possible now. It would be a good exercise for someone to go through to try it and maybe blog about it and get it out there to people, maybe even add it to the cookbook, that if you really just don't want the parallelization of Upstart, do this, your system starts in serial. And I actually know specific users who have asked me, is there just a way to make it start one after the other and show me everything it's doing?
You wouldn't, it still wouldn't be like looking at an rc.d folder and looking at the numbers in the order, because you would just have to do it once to know what that deterministic order is, right? There's no way to know which of the 6 events that are starting in parallel, which one would come first. You'd have to just turn it on and find out.
Well, actually,
which is okay. I mean, it's
if it
yeah,
goes,
it's the life is like a box of chocolates and cookies. We have 3 minutes left. By the way.
so, I was just going to say that it is actually deterministic. It's just hard to know, because if you did this thing, it's going to run through the Upstart internal tree, which is loaded lexicographically.
And
Right.
because there's some kind of dry run command you could do to just, if I would start in the system, this is what would happen.
No, we talked about that one.
Okay.
Because you can't know which events will fire when. We can know when they did last time. That's what we talked about, is
Okay.
recording that
All right.
and making that more of a like an
And
obvious
it-
format that you could look at.
and that would be this machine with this configuration, given these network conditions and load conditions. That's
this time of
actually
day.
what it would. Yeah.
When the humidity was
When the
at
temperature is
70%.
above, yeah. Let's be fair.
Have we covered
We covered
everything you've
I
brought
think
to
so.
us?
I believe so.
All right.
Have we addressed everything in the current Ubuntu developer? Sorry.
You were talking about full separation of services, but that's really kind of fits into another session, right? So, somewhat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a session on Upstart, status of Upstart fine services?
Upstart Fine Services.
Is there a session on it?
Yeah, well, Upstart Fine, the remainder of 6.5 services in May, yes. Tomorrow. In fact, and that sounds maybe a little bit dry, but we have some inaccurate track handle, but we have some thoughts on how we can actually speed up the process of migrating 130 odd services, making that migration easier, but we could also that would help with the existing Upstart services, introducing more understandable names, simplifying conditions. So yeah, please come on tomorrow.
All right. Okay, we'll be done.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
No, thank you.